the people, by the people. For the culture.
Peace, Jumbo. Welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast, right here on Black Power Media, Reloaded. My name is Fernando Cardenas, aka International X Beat. I am your host. This is episode 67. Before anything, I want to invite you to check out Afro-veganism magazine. The link is down in the description and you can get it for free. This is an online magazine by Black Power Media. On this second issue, there is an interview with speech of Arrested Development done by Kalanji Changa. There is also an article on the Independent Party of Color from Cuba, the first Black political party of the Western Hemisphere. This is Hidden History, written by the comrade Vlad and myself, and much more. A lot of dope articles on there. Make sure you go check it out, Afro-veganism magazine. All right. I'm getting some positive feedback from the last couple of episodes of the VITAL HOOPS podcast, so I appreciate you all for watching, for listening. Please make sure you keep sharing. Share these episodes. Tell a friend to tell a friend. Now today, we have another very special guest. Our guest is a Black, queer, Haitian French PhD candidate at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Her work explores the presence of plant-based diets, Afro-veganism, and animal-centric ethics throughout the African diaspora. Our guest is now teaching the first Afro-vegan academic class at the University of California, Santa Barbara. It is a Black Studies course titled Black Veganism, Animality and Race in the African Diaspora. I am grateful to have them on the show. Our guest is Solaire Denaud. Solaire Denaud, welcome to the VITAL HOOPS Podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time. I've been following your work for a little while, and I appreciate what you do. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
No problem, no problem. So listen, before we get into anything else, I would like you to please define Afro-veganism, if you could.
Oh, definition directly.
Yes.
Yeah. So usually I define it kind of as a willingness from Black people to extract themselves from a capitalistic system that oppress both animalized being, that is Black and brown people, but also animals. So it's kind of like the junction of veganism and anti-racism.
Okay.
In summary, very short, just like that.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I like that. Thank you for that. I gave a little background on you, but if you could please get a little bit more into your story, you know, who you are, where you grew up, and how and when you got into veganism, and how did that kind of like transform into, you know, Afro-veganism? When did you understand the importance of that?
Yeah, so who I am, well, I'm Solaire Denaud. I come from a Haitian and French background. So I spent a few years in my childhood in Haiti, where my father still lives, in Cap-Haïtien, for people who are from Haiti. And then I moved to France, where my mother is from, and that's where I was mostly raised, and that's where I did most of my education, therefore my accent. And you know, there are a whole lot of things that led me to veganism. I think, like a lot of people, it's something that kind of just like matured in my head from childhood to adulthood. So I can talk to a few moments that I think kind of like God just did a little bit of something, from childhood. I think a lot of it was just abuse that I witnessed. Trigger warning, I'm going to talk about childhood abuse here, but yeah, I grew up with a very abusive stepfather, and before or at the same time as he started to reveal that face of himself, he also started to abuse our dog and animals around me. And I kind of just saw as a child trauma in my dog it was just like not just the pain, but like really like the PTSD, the reactions, it was like a mirror, you know. It was just like seeing the same type of thing that I was going through, but in the dog. And so I feel that gave me a sort of like sensitivity. I was not a vegetarian child. I never got that option. I was just eating whatever was on the table. But I think it definitely gave me this sort of like, you know, I feel safer with my dog ultimately than I feel with a lot of humans around me. So
Right.
there was a lot of that growing up. And then during adulthood, I think I pretty much studied environmental ethics throughout undergrads and my master's, but it was in France. And I think it's mostly going to be an American public that's going to listen to that. So I don't know if you'll know that, but in France, we cannot study race, right?
Absolutely.
This
Yeah.
this is a colorblind country. Race does not exist. It's in the Constitution. Boo. So that was really not part of my curriculum. But what was interesting me was the environmental side. So even before I was vegan, I was always around that, both in my activist interest and my academic interest. I was just a big environmental nerd. And then the anti-racist and Black feminist side of my brain was more in my activist involvement, but it just could never, you know, mix up in what I was researching. And then there were a few moments, a lot actually, of moments when I was studying where I was just like asking questions and trying to bridge things out. And I was just facing this like wall,
Right.
this wall where I just could not find people who had the same interest and who wanted to dialogue with me about that. It was always just a pushback on the possibility that maybe climate change and chattel slavery should be analyzed together, or maybe, you know, and even just vegan stuff, there was a lot of resistance. Like I remember during my master's, I had asked, we were talking about sustainable fishing, but right before that, we had talked about the ocean being depleted of fish. And so I just raised my hand and I was like, but if the oceans are depleted of fish, if we do sustainable fishing, are we just sustaining a population of fish that is already almost extinct? You know,
Right.
should we wait until it grows bigger to establish sustainable fishing? Because what is sustainable if the ocean is already almost depleted? That does not make sense.
Absolutely.
And I got screamed at. Like all the students just turned towards me and were like, no, 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 it's not like that. There was like a wall, and I was just like, clearly there is something here if people are reacting that violently, you know what I mean? So
Yeah.
I realized two things, I think, at that moment. One, that I was that close to be, I was that close to be a vegan. Or I was already a vegan, maybe, I don't remember.
Okay.
It was around that time, but like I really needed to go that way, and also that I needed to leave France. That's something that I realized at the time. I was like, this is not gonna work. This is not gonna work. So I decided to leave to the United States where I could study race. And I started reading texts. Right now, there is a big movement in research that is analyzing chattel slavery and environment together, and that is talking about the dehumanization of Black people. What does it mean to be the only human population that has been in the category animals? So I was reading all of these texts, and I just approached my PhD program in the United States as whatever text is thrown my way, I will just assume that they talk about animals. So if we're reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, I'm going to see if he's talking about animals. If we're reading Black feminist literature, I'm going to see where the animals are in that. And that's how my research started. As simple as that, as an intellectual game.
No doubt. That's interesting. Thank you for that. You know, it's crazy because when you speak about people reacting a certain way when we talk about, you know, veganism within the environmental spectrum, you know what I mean? It's crazy. I get that a lot still to this day, and I feel like a lot of people still don't make the connection. Like I lived in the United States for a while, but I'm in France now, right?
Right.
And I still see a lot of people that call themselves environmentalists. You know, now there's a little bit more conscience coming in where a lot of people call themselves flexitarian, this and that, but I still see a lot of them just eating meat on the regular, and I guess they don't see the connection really when it's so obvious, you know what I mean? And it's serious. Like the meat industry is one of the main reasons related directly to the ecocide that we're living, right?
Right.
Why do you think that is, that people don't see the connection, or don't want to see that connection?
I think it's just there is the way Europeans have occupied the planet since chattel slavery is so anchored in like exploitation and dehumanization and just like treating everything as if they are dead matters. Like it's just like
Absolutely.
we're depleting the soil, we're
Yeah.
depleting our own energy, like everybody's burning out
Yeah.
for what? Like for sustain capitalism, to sustain a
Yeah.
lifestyle. I think it questions too much the ground on which this society we live in is built on. Like it, if you start checking that ground, then
Mm-hmm.
you know
Yeah.
you need to question
Absolutely.
everything at that point. So I think
Absolutely.
that sort of like violent reaction is like, no, I will keep living that way.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it is, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No doubt. I agree with that. Talk to me a little bit about, your podcast. That's kind of how I got to know you. I bumped into your podcast, L'Afro-Écologiste, which is a great podcast, by the way, for anybody that understands, French. I'm gonna have, the link down in the description for sure. Make sure you check that out. But speak a little bit about that, your podcast. How did you begin? When did you get the idea? And
It began during COVID, actually. So I was already in the States. I was already working on what I've been working on, which is, I should have said that since the beginning, actually, but plant-based diets in the African diaspora. That's what I do.
Mhm.
And I just, the academic world is very closed on itself. And I just got tired of interacting only with other academics. And also, I think maybe a little bit of guilt because, I left France to be able to do what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm also in academia to give back in a sense. And I was just like, I want to see what Black veganism is in a French-speaking context. I kind of
Yeah.
wanted to create the beginning of an archive,
Mhm.
just talking to Black vegans who speak French, so who might be from the French-speaking Caribbean, the French-speaking African countries, or France, and just be like, why are you vegan? Like, because I know I am vegan, but why are you vegan? Did you connect that to anti-imperialism, maybe, which is the case of a lot of Africans I interrogated. Some of them are hoteps, some of them are Black feminists, some of them are just like people who are not super connected to like a lot of political causes, but who went their own way. That might be health. And I just wanted to have a sort of like the beginning of something where the Black French-speaking people could just approach veganism, because on the English-speaking side, there is much, much more.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, there is more, definitely more information. I want to talk a little bit about decolonizing, right? Like, I'm a Pan-Africanist. I work with an organization here in France, called the Pan-African League Umoja.
Yeah.
And so we, when we talk about struggling for, African liberation, we talk a lot about decolonizing. And so how do you think the decolonization of our diet fits into all of that, as African people or people of African descent?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's two things. I think it's decolonizing in the sense of, yes, questioning what we're eating, why we're eating it, and where it comes from, and why sometimes we think that a type of food is what we need to eat, or what is, But I think it's also looking at, because decolonizing is like deconstructing, but there are a lot of Black people who came before us, and some people have also constructed, not just deconstructed. So I'm also looking at diets in the African diaspora that were promoted by Black people because it meant something to them. So not just the criticizing and deconstructing our diet, but looking at what other people have promoted and why. And very often what I'm observing with the movements that I study is that they thought it through, like before us, they really
Yeah.
thought it through. The Rastas, it's almost, because I study the Rastafari movement as one of these movements, it's really, it's almost a process of like becoming indigenous again, because they're just like, we've
Yes.
been taken away from where we're indigenous from, which is Africa, obviously.
Mhm.
But now we're in
Well,
Jamaica.
now I'm sorry. Nowadays, it's not that clear to everybody that we're from Africa. I don't know if you've seen all these types of crazy
Listen,
movements.
Listen.
It's not that obvious to everybody, but yeah, but you're right. Over here, people that are gonna be watching this Black Power Media, we know we're Africans. So yeah, it's all good. Yeah,
So
but
they're
go
in
ahead.
Jamaica. And they do come from Africa or the African continent. And they're like, being indigenous of the land is like taking care of it and thinking about what world are we gonna create now that we have a little bit of freedom, and like their diets come from that. So more optimistically, that's what I want to study too. Is just like not just the decolonizing, but the taking power and deciding that we're gonna eat a certain way because that's what makes sense for us.
Absolutely. Yeah. And when you talk about white hegemony, you spoke about what the Europeans have done over the all over the world, basically. And if we study our ancestors in Africa, we know that before colonization, our ancestors weren't caging animals. Some of them might have been eating animals in a certain way that was very different from what's going on today in the capitalistic world. But caging animals and all of that came with colonization, right? So I think I've told this story before, but there's a chef that is part of the organization that I work with, and he is passionate, about cooking and all of that. And he told me that, once he got deep into the research, he was like, most of our dishes didn't include meat till after colonization. That's why most African dishes actually have plant names, you know what I mean? And that's why we cook the meat separately, because originally in most of African dishes, the meat wasn't in there. You know what I'm saying? So that's one thing that that's not necessarily common knowledge to people. Everybody's always like, yeah, we're Africans, we eat a lot of meat, this and that. But there's a story to that. You know what I mean?
There is a story to that, and
yeah,
absolutely, I completely
yeah.
join you with that. And living in France, it's so obvious because in France, the French food always has meat names,
Yeah, exactly,
So,
yeah.
it's bœuf bourguignon, it's
Yeah.
beef. Though that it's centered around meat is very often not the case with African dishes, as you said. It's gonna be mafe, it's gonna be ndole, it's gonna be the name of a leaf, the name of a sauce,
Exactly.
and then the meat may or may not be in here. But also the dishes that were born in the Americas from enslaved Africans, it may be the same, and when it's not, there is almost like a shyness to name the meat sometimes. Like if you go to Guadeloupe, the tail of the pig is going to be called petit salé, the little salty. It's almost as if you don't want to name it, and it's going to be almost like melted in the sauce.
Absolutely.
But it's not that big head of a pig that's going to be put in the middle of a platter. So there is definitely a relationship with meat that is not the same.
Yeah, that is not indigenous to us, because also a lot of the meat that our ancestors started eating, if you look like later on in history, it's slave food, right? It's slave food. We got rest. Our ancestors got the rest of whatever they could get, like pig's feet, you know what I mean, and things like that, right? That's whatever the Europeans wouldn't eat, they would throw it, and that's the only thing our ancestors had to eat. So, but obviously they found ways to make shit taste good, because that's what we do. We make shit taste good, right? So, but yeah, no doubt. Let's get into environmental justice. Could you please, for those who may not know, define, environmental justice and talk about how it ties in with Afro-veganism?
I actually don't use that frame too much, but it be all of the social activism that is linked to environmental damages.
Yes.
And like, environmental racism and the fact that it disproportionately affects Black community, as we know. And there are countless examples of that. Just the fact that climate change affects mostly the continents that participate in climate change the least, as is very popular.
Yeah.
I mean, the way it ties to veganism, I think, is very obvious, just with the fact that the meat industry is one of the most polluting on Earth, very simply, if you link environmental justice and the way we eat. The way I talk about the environment when I teach a class, usually, I kind of just like, the first thing I do is connecting slavery and climate change. That is the first thing I do. I just go back to chattel slavery, and I'm just like, the first thing Europeans did, one, deforesting their own forest to build slave ships. Going on these boats to the Americas, deforesting again, and implementing monocrops, which was not the way the land used to be cultivated, neither in Europe nor elsewhere before chattel slavery. Climate change is basically, you know, like it's just like we focus a lot on like the exploitation on African slaves, and that's fair because that's, you know, and the massacres of Native Americans. But it's also a certain relationship with the land that is established when they arrive there. It's cutting the trees, implementing monocrops, depleting the soil to the point that the soil are just not as healthy anymore. Like it's just like and eradicating along with Native Americans entire cultures, entire word views around how to take care of the land, around how to heal, around, you know, all of that. I'm not gonna say disappear because Native Americans are still there, so it's like still there, but it's just like it's the loss is just, I don't even have word, I'm speechless. It's just like the loss of culture that goes with it is just absolutely crazy. And then it's the same with enslaved Africans who are brought there technically because they have agricultural competencies, but they're not allowed to cultivate the land the way they would. They have to buy into this extremely violent plantation system. So not only do they experience violence on their own body, but they are, through them, like it's just like a certain type of agriculture is put into place where they don't even get to be creative that way. Like it's really preventing people to inhabit the land the way they want to, you know, like they exist on the land, but they don't inhabit it. And then it's just like countless species of animals that disappear at the same time. Like how are we talking about climate change and we're not talking about all of these species that we don't even know for a lot of them that disappeared along the destruction of their habitats? Like it's just, that's when climate change starts. That's when climate change starts. It's not with the Industrial Revolution 2 centuries after. Like that's when it starts. That's the beginning. And all of the type of agricultures we have nowadays, it's basically built after the plantation system. It's just like we have monocrops everywhere now. It's like the spreading of the plantation system to the world. Exploited workers that exploit a land, that deplete the soil, that, you know, I'm almost at a loss of word because it like pisses me off as I'm saying it, you know. It's just that, you know, it's like it's the link between racism and climate change is just like it's crazy that we do not
obvious,
talk about these two things together. You know?
No doubt. You know, when you speak about the soil, the quality of the soil, it's crazy. I read a statistic the other day that spoke about how I think it was 40 years ago, right? The nutrients that you get from one apple, you have to eat 4 apples now to get that amount of nutrients. You know what I mean? So as far as minerals and vitamins, that's how depleted our soil is. You know, and now we know we have microplastic, you know, all over. We have that in the soil, in the water, in the air. It affects Black women more than white women, but there's like, you know, microplastic babies, you know, when they're drinking breast milk, they're already getting microplastic, you know. So the whole thing, the way it ties in, like you said, it's obvious, and I like how you make that connection from the beginning of chattel slavery, because this white hegemonic system, it has no limits. Like, you know, it sees no humanity, no nature, right? Like this is one of our problems today. You know, we're caught up in this system, and we're kind of separated from nature. We don't understand that we're actually part of nature, you know, and that we can't live without nature. People kind of see nature as something different or something other than themselves. You know what I'm saying?
Something that is not alive.
Absolutely.
The soil is alive. It's only when you think that the soil is dead that you think that you can just like extract from it. But it is alive though. Worms, there is gas, there is water, there are all types of things in the soil that makes it fertile. Like, we say the soil is fertile. That's just literally the ground for life. But yeah, and it comes from this fracture that happened with slavery, where everything become a resource and everything becomes something to be extracted except white bodies. So it's just, it becomes that thing where it's just like human, subhumans, Black people and brown people, non-humans, animals, and then the soil just all become resources. They all become coal, they all become
everything is a commodity. Everything's a commodity. Until this day, that's how they're moving, you know. You know, when we speak about veganism, I hear certain vegans say that, veganism is only about the animals. I have a problem with that because when I see veganism, from a holistic perspective, but I guess that's kind of where Afro-veganism comes in. You know what I mean? Because us as African people, we have a different experience, right? If our health is affected, right? Like say, for example, in our neighborhoods, and people of African descent, right? They have more problems as far as, diabetes, heart problems, high blood pressure, all of that. You know what I mean? It affects us the most, right? And we know being on a whole foods plant-based diet helps with that, right? We also, when we talk about the environment also, which is actually, it is linked to the animals as well, like you said, but there's the, the planet, it's not just the animals, it's human health, the planet, the animals, it's everything. It's a holistic thing to me, right? What do you think about that? And talk to me about health.
The question of like strictly animal-centric veganism, it's a very interesting one and it's a very timely one because I do see this discourse like as more feminists, more Black people, more everything start making connections, you really have the rise of this discourse that is saying, no, it's about animals.
Yeah.
It's about but maintaining animals as completely separated from everything else is like maintaining nature separated from everything else. We're making it a sort of like box outside of society or outside of everything else that could be addressed without talking about the things around, but like it does not work that way. It does not work that way. I think the other question that I have for people who think like that is the question of just like, in terms of their activism, pragmatically, is this working? Because most of the vegans and vegetarians in the world are on the Asian continent and in the African continent. Europe is 2% of vegans, North America is 3% of vegans. Whereas in the United States, Black people are 8% of vegans. So it's just like, you can tell that these plant-based diets that are integrated in the anti-racism, in anti-imperialism, or sometimes even in people's religions are more widespread than veganism isolated to the animal cause. So it's just like, who does it benefit really when you only talk about animals? Does it really benefit animals? Or does it benefit white people?
It's a great point. That's a great point.
Who does it benefit? Because it's not white people who are the main vegan population, contrarily to what we think, or vegetarian even. So it's just like, who does it benefit when you only talk about animals separated from everything else? But then, as you said, and as we've established before, everything being connected, when you're just isolating it, exactly what are you saying? Like, it doesn't really work. I think once you start understanding animality as an abjection that is placed on certain bodies and that allows people to exploit them, is because we have placed that quality of animal under a pig, under a goat, under a cow, that people think that they can do anything with their body. But it's also because they have placed animality on Black people that people thought that they could do anything to Black. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like racism is also the animalization of Black people. And that's what allowed white people to treat Black people like cattle. And so once you start understanding it that way, as like a quality that is placed on different bodies to produce violence, it shifts differently in your mind. And if you observe discourses around genocides, like the genocide that is happening right now, or genocides that have happened before, you see like one of the common point between all of them is that the population that is doing the genocide will call the population that they want to kill rats, vermin, insects. Like, they will animalize the population they want to kill because it's that quality of animality that allow them to produce that extreme violence. You need to convince people that these people are not the same to be able to do what you're going to do.
Yes.
So, you know.
Yeah, no doubt. What was it for you, because it's not easy. Like you said, the percentage, to me, it's kind of amazing, but the percentages of people that are actually vegan are still very low, right?
Right.
What was it that did it for you? What was it that made you really, like, I know for myself, it was kind of gradual, truthfully. Like, first I stopped eating pork. When I was younger, I got influenced more by like Malcolm X when I started reading the autobiography of Malcolm. Afterwards, being an athlete, there was talk about red meat not being good for you. As an athlete, it was better to eat white meat, quote unquote. I later found out that that wasn't true either, but it was kind of gradual. And then my brothers, they grew up in New York City. They came home, Rastas, and I was influenced by that as well. They've been vegetarians for many years. So it was kind of a mix of all that kind of influenced me, but I still wasn't vegan, right? I was kind of, quote unquote, conscious on how I ate and other things, but it wasn't until 2016 that I went really totally vegan. My wife and I actually, we went vegan together when my son was 1, and it was really a documentary that kind of made us want to really do it, right? And it was basically more so based in the environment, right? The planet. We understand the destruction of the planet, right?
Right.
And we don't want to be a part of that. We definitely don't want to be a part of how the meat industry works, and all of that. But what was it for you that kind of, made you switch?
Yeah, like you, it was a process. I
Yeah.
think I was trying to get at that at the beginning. I didn't say it super clearly, but I think it was the environment technically, just because that's what I was
Yeah.
studying. So intellectually, that's what I knew, that most of the deforestation is to feed cattle. Like I just knew, I kind of knew that just environmentally speaking, we should stop eating meat even before the question of sentience and whatnot. Then I had these childhood memories on the back that were just like, I just knew. Like I just knew that like it's not. I knew that I saw a soul in that dog. Like I just knew it. So then there was that cognitive dissonance that was just make me not want to think about it, but it was bothering me. Like it was just bothering me. I knew I wasn't happy about how I was eating, and I think that's what you're describing when you start like looking a little bit around and you're like, oh, maybe I should stop just one thing, and then I should stop this other thing, and then you start going in this spiral. But I think the day I became a vegan, because actually there was a day and there was a moment, and I never ate meat after that. It was actually my body, it wasn't my head. Because the thing sometimes with like researchers is like, I'm in my head, but like what made me switch was actually my body. And I was just like eating with my boss at the time. I had this like student job, and I got along with my boss who invited me to dinner, and we were eating empanadas. And I just took a bite of like a pork empanadas, and like the meat wasn't like quite cooked enough. And so it felt like, when you like bite your cheek and then you have blood in your mouth and it feels disgusting, but it wasn't my blood. And there was just this thing where I was just like, I literally have a dead body in my mouth right now. Like it's just like I had this physical reaction. I think I spit it, and like it was disgusting. Don't do that, but I spit it in my
like, don't do
towel, and I was just like, this is never going in my mouth ever again. And it never did. I think it was just like my body realized that this was a body at that moment. And like I was for years thinking about it, and I could just never take that step of like being vegan. And I knew everything about it. Like I was very informed because that's what I studied. It was my body.
Yeah. I feel it. That's interesting. You spoke about Rastafari, right? Like before the vegan community even existed, right? There was Rastafari, right? That was eating ital, and it was centered in African values, what I call, African culture, which is the respect, towards life, towards all life, right? And so Rastas eat ital, meaning that, it's all natural food from the soil, it's food that there's no need to kill another animal to feed yourself, right? We respect life, we respect other people's and other animals' lives. So there's no need to hurt another being in order to feed your body, right? Today, yeah, like even when I went vegan, like close to 10 years ago, pretty much when you were vegan, unless you were eating just bread and fries, you were going to be somewhat healthier. You know what I mean? Because you were going to eat lots of, you were going to eat beans, you were going to eat vegetables, you were going to eat, right? So that's pretty much, it was close to a whole foods plant-based diet, right? And we know that's the best diet you can be on. So, but today, unfortunately, you can go vegan and be super unhealthy, right? So you can go vegan and pretty much eat the same way you're eating when you're a meat eater, but you're vegan. I guess there's certain things that are positive, but the system is in it, right? The system is in it. So like you see a lot of corporations, big brands, all of these things, including brands that are participating in genocide and all types of things. Now they're making like vegan food. it's kind of, it goes back to what we're talking about, the vicious system that we live in. But how do you feel about that? You know, how do you see that? Do you see like vegan junk food and all these things as something positive? Do you see them as something that's contributing to the problem? What's your opinion on all of that?
That's a complicated question. I think I feel, I don't know, I'm always shared between my ideals and just the urgency of people needing to stop meat.
Mhm.
I'm kind of like always in between these two things. So I have a whole lot of respect for what the Rastafari did. I just published a chapter about it. Actually in the vegan anthology. I think we don't give credit enough for the Rastas for what they did because it's actually exceptional, the philosophy that they've built in the 30s. Like,
Yeah.
I can talk about that more after, but we don't give credit enough to them for what they did. Ideally, we would all eat organic, whole food, non-transformed products. At the same time, the industry creating this, it just made it easier for people who may not really care about the animals or even about their health, sometimes, particularly when you're young and you feel that you will never get sick.
Yeah.
It's like, it does allow people to at least reduce their meat inputs. So I don't know that I have like a very binary opinion on that.
Okay.
It's definitely part of capitalism, it's definitely part
Yeah.
of that competitive system we mentioned. You're absolutely right about that.
Yeah.
Um,
The thing with that is that, I try to eat as much, whole foods, plant-based, but I sometimes eat junk food. I do eat, vegan junk food and things like that. But the thing with that is that I feel like to transition, I guess if you're able to transition with these types of, fake meats and fake cheeses and things like that, then go more into like a whole foods, like actual legumes and vegetables that are not processed, that are not so much processed. I feel like that could work. But I feel like when you stay on the processed food, I don't know why. I feel like like it's easier for you to go back to eating meat. Maybe I'm mistaken, but that's kind of like how I view it.
I don't know.
So
I
I'm
don't
kind
know
of
if that's
skeptical.
what you mean,
Yeah, yeah,
it definitely is closer both in taste and
yeah.
in terms of like how. 'Cause it's not just the meat, it's also just like this sort of like addiction to fry and excess of sugar that we all have.
Absolutely. High in salt, high in sugar, high in oil. All these things that we're addicted to. Yeah, for sure.
So you keep getting that rush.
Yeah,
That's the
yeah,
like you may not want to eat meat, but you keep getting that rush, and then
yeah, yeah,
therefore kind of like you're like that close to going back to it.
yeah.
I guess it probably depends on how people got there. I feel that the fact that somebody died for me to eat it will always be what blocks me from eating meat. And you could give me impossible meat. I don't feel that it would make me switch just because like it was violent, that body reaction that I had when I realized what I had in my mouth. Like I do not want to do that again.
Mm,
But I guess yeah, it depends.
mm,
It depends how you got there. It depends how you
for
got there.
sure.
I see what you mean in the sense that you're so still in the type of food that you were eating before just
Yeah,
without any products in it,
yeah,
that could make you switch. But yeah,
yeah.
I guess I don't.
Mm. Yeah,
I
that's
can't
just
comment on that.
yeah, that's just something that I think about because I try not to consume too much of these products,
Mhm.
also just because, as far as health and also because like, I'm raising my children vegan as well, and children, they get used to certain things as well, they're young and so they also have to recognize things, if they're constantly eating vegan burgers, a regular burger looks just the same. So it's quote unquote dangerous when they're out there in the world, they're used to eating vegan burgers and they think it's a vegan burger. It's not really a vegan. So, there's a lot, but yeah, it's definitely interesting, something to think about, something to talk about.
It's also a
Um,
conversation. I feel like it's also a conversation that kind of needs to go with again other social justice issues, such
yeah,
as how much time do we have for our children, you
yes.
know, because it's also like I used to eat almost completely like whole food, plant-based, and like I used to eat actually really well. I also had time to cook, and then I went into a PhD program, and when you get into that rhythm, I
Yeah,
still do. I love
yeah,
Haitian food. There is no Haitian food around me because I'm in California, so it's just like
yeah.
95% of what I cook is me. We obviously, of what I eat is of my own cooking or my spouse. But you know, it's also how much time do we have to care for ourselves? How much time do we have to care for our children? What about, you know, maternal leave, paternal leave? Like all of these questions are around that too. It's just like a lot of people don't really get that choice.
Yeah.
Vegan or not. Vegan or not. It's just
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
you know, it's also healthier even if you eat meat to cook your own food, you know? It's not just vegans.
For sure. Let's go back a little bit to Rastafari. You know, you spoke, you spoke a little bit about that. You've been studying and writing about that.
Yes.
What inspired you from that, from the Ital Livity, as we say? Talk to me about it.
Oh my God, so many things. I feel that the Rastas just pinpointed so many issues that we're like suddenly rediscovering nowadays, but like they were already there and they were there. They've just articulated so many things that we talk about nowadays. I mean, the way I describe the Rastafari movement is one of my presentation. It's one of my talk that I give the most. It's like very demanded. But if I have to like summarize the Rasta movement in like 30 seconds, I would describe it really as like an overdoses of violence. Like it's the 1930s, chattel slavery was like 4 generations ago, and then right after that you had indentureship with like these like overexploited workers coming from Asia. That wasn't quite slavery, but it wasn't too far. Replacing the enslaved Africans on the fields for like very, very cheap pay. And so you have just these people who are just seeing slavery recycling itself. Basically, it's just like indentureship, and then after the end of indentureship is just like neocolonialism, and like it's still like this like very violent form of exploitation that are happening in Jamaica. And so you just have part of the youth that just goes to the mountain basically, and it's just like, we're not doing this, we're not going to win in this system. So, and that's the thing with decolonizing, but then also constructing, that I like about the Rastafari, that they really went there and they were just like, how do we want to live? And that's what liberty is. It's the way to live to the fullest, you know? And you may not agree with the Rasta, but just asking yourself, what does it mean to actually live? You know, what existence do you live under slavery? What existence do you live under capitalism as a Black person or as an Indian person, as some of them were also Indian? It's just like, what is the way you want to live to the fullest? And Aital actually just mean vital.
Right.
So again, it's just like what food makes us live the best. And it's not just related to health for the Rastas, it's also just putting back the sacred into the land, into the animals, and into Black bodies. Because the first act of chattel slavery is saying Black people and Native Americans do not have a soul. You are not godly. The violence of that. You know, the difference between white bodies and Black bodies is like, you will not go to paradise. You do not have a soul. You are not godly. Like that is one of the fundamental acts of chattel slavery. And the Rastas are saying, no, we will put God back into ourselves so that we can love ourselves. We will put God back in the land as well. And that's, you know, like you see the connection between what I was saying with climate change and chattel slavery. Absolutely. It's just like, it's like turning everything into a resource that is not godly, because you need to remove the spiritual from it to be able to do that. You're just saying they do not matter. They're things, they're dead matter, basically. Right. They're rocks, they're whatnot. But the Rastas are putting God back in it, and then they're saying, if you kill another human fellow, or if you kill another godly being, which may be an animal, you are affecting your level of aliveness. You're affecting your own humanity when you do that. That's what they're like. How smart? How smart? You know, and like when people say veganism is just about the animals, you can also think like the Rastas, where the animals are there. Like, I'm not saying the animals are not part of it. Of course, it's part of it. But it's also for you, and it's not wrong to say that. You know, you have this sort of like weird Christian impulse to say that you're like, it's just like you're just giving of yourself for the animals. It's for everybody. Absolutely. It's okay to care for yourself, because we've not been told to care for ourselves. So, you know, it's fine. You don't have to feel guilt because you're taking care of yourself and the animals and your peers. And, you know, it's also about you. For sure. Yeah, I love that. Are you familiar with Dr. Iris Latham? Yes. I love how he says,
You know what I mean? It's like I worry about this animal right here and what this animal puts into his body. He's like, you know, and when I do that, the rest of the animals, they don't have to worry about me. You know, they don't have to worry about me. They're gonna be good, right?
Right.
Um,
Right.
so,
And
yeah.
yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah, so that's a dope connection, you know. So I want to congratulate you, right? Because in the fall of 2024, you will be teaching the first Afro-vegan academic class, right?
Hey, it already started. It started on Monday, so it's on.
Congratulations.
On.
Congratulations. So that is Black veganism, animality, and race in the African diaspora, right? That's the title of it.
So is the title of it, and we will
Dope.
basically talk in length about what we've been talking
Yes. Yes.
about
So,
in this podcast, basically. And I have to
uh-huh.
shout out to the Black Studies Department of the University of California, Santa Barbara, who trusted me with that because this is risky, you know. Risky. It's a department where a whole lot of people are vegan and vegetarian, actually.
That's
Proving
dope.
once again that Black people are really leading the cause. The chair of the department is vegan. They have like I think 3 people who are vegetarian in there. Like, and it's a small department, so it's like maybe a solid 20%. I don't know. But you know, they're like very open to all of these ideas, and they've allowed me to start this class as like an experiment for now. And if it's working, but I think it's gonna work because the students are like really invested already, I think.
That's
But, you
dope. That's dope,
know,
man.
knock on wood. Hopefully, you know, it will reproduce. And I think for me, the goal, once I'm done with my PhD, which should be soon, and if I get the chance to become a professor, would be to really create a Afro-vegan and wellness hub in academia where I can really, you know, just give back and train other Black and brown students to do the same thing and to talk about
Yes.
how it is in their community, etc., etc. So that's the goal.
No doubt. No doubt. That's great. That's great. Congratulations on that. And yeah, it's definitely gonna work. I'm sure it'll work. I've been following you for a little while, and I know, you know, your material is very much needed and necessary. So I appreciate your work, you know. Before you go, we like to do this book recommendations, you know, here on the Vital Hoops podcast, because, you know, unfortunately, a lot of our people today is getting, you know, information from short clips, you know, all the time. And that's okay, you know, to use the technology and all of that. But sometimes I feel like we need to get back to the books, you know what I mean? And get some of that knowledge. So if you have a good book you would like to recommend or a good book or two, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I may have two actually.
Dope. Go
I think
for it.
probably the book that everybody always recommend is Afko and Silko, Afroism, which is kind of like the Black vegan Bible. So because I think a lot of people already know that book, I'm actually going to recommend the second one that people know a little bit less, which is Racism as a Zoological Witchcraft
Okay.
by Afko, which really goes back more to the religious root of race and animality,
Okay.
which is like a developing field, but I feel it's just fascinating. So that goes back to kind of like that first moment I was mentioning, where the first act is to remove the soul out of Black people and
Mm-hmm.
of animals equally. Animals don't go to paradise as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to that, and it really interests me because all of the movements I study are religious.
Mm-hmm.
The Rastafari movement is a religion, the Nation of Islam. So a lot of it is
That's true.
around the sacred. You know, it's around the sacred, and it's around the importance of the sacred in care.
Yeah.
So it's the first one I would recommend, and the second one is not obviously vegan, but is The Color Pynk by Omise'eke Tinsley,
Yeah.
where I think it's the third part of the book is on Black feminist environmentalism and Black feminist veganism. So that centers
Wow.
more on Black women
Okay.
and also a little bit on queerness, and that's also an intersection that's just like rarely talked about. So
Yeah.
that's the one I want to recommend as a second recommendation.
Amazing. Amazing. I appreciate that. I'm gonna have that down in the description as well. Make sure you check those out. I have to check those out as well. I have not read those two books. So
It's recent.
I appreciate the recommendations. Yeah, so that's about it. You know, before you go, I would love for you to let everybody know your socials, you know, where they can follow you, social, website, all of that, and see what you got going on.
Yeah. So for the social, it's gonna be l'Afro-ecologist, which you were mentioning. It's like the social that started the podcast. I'm not doing the podcast anymore. I'm just using it to kind of like update people as to where my research is going. And I also have a website, which is just www.solairedenaud.com. So my name, and then you will see my publications, just like any updates, my talks, where I give them, etc. So if you're in the United States, if you're in California in particular, and you want to follow a little bit what I do, but thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time. Thank you for the opportunity to just talk about my research, because that's why I'm doing it.
I appreciate it.
Hear about it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you. And all your info is going to be down in the description. Everybody go follow Solaire. And listen, anytime. I'd love to have you back on, at some point, maybe after this fall semester, so you can let us know how the class went, and what's next. What's next for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good one. Peace. All right. Thank you to Solaire Denaud. Make sure you follow her on IG. Check out her work. Like I said, all the links are down in the description. Please like, share, subscribe. Go to blackpowermedia.org. Also, if you're interested in this topic, Afro-veganism, episode 32 of the VITAL HOOPS Podcast. It's called Afro-vegan, and the link is down in the description. I appreciate y'all for rocking with us right here on Black Power Media. VITAL HOOPS is for the people, by the people, for the culture. Uhuru.